Welcome to WhatWorks, where nonprofit leaders share real stories about what makes impact possible and their organizations thrive. Because success has patterns, and we're here to discover some of those together. I'm your host, Marla Moody. I'm a leadership coach who came from the nonprofit world. And today we're going to explore cultural diversity and how to understand those you serve. And also the grant writing, some practical tips and how understanding who you serve connects with the grant writing and how you give that vision. My guest, Abbie, is the executive director of Portland Adult Education. She brings a remarkable background in education, translation, and nonprofit leadership. She's known for creating strategies that drive growth, even with limited resources, and turning culture and linguistics into opportunities. So get ready. Abbie's here to tell us what works. Welcome,
Thanks,
Abbie.
Marla.
How are you today?
Thanks. I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about this. So, grant writing is something I love doing, and I kind of fell into when I was a graduate student and I needed to support my own research. Through that, I really learned how to do research of how to find the grants to apply to in the first place. I spent a lot of time looking for grants to apply to because it wasn't just internal grants that I was applying to, but external ones as well. Also, I learned how to shape stories, research as stories, and align that with what the grantors were looking for. So that's where I got my start in grant writing. It was not something that I did professionally until much later. I initially started in academia and I was teaching at the college level for a few years. I left that and then I was doing translation interpretation and then going into more DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion work, driving that and thinking about how does that happen, because my research and interests and also my professional experience in academia had a lot to do with diversity work as well. My research was primarily around ethnic minorities and how colonialism affected ethnic minorities and also women in national contexts and imperial national contexts. So that aligned well also with what I was doing in academia as well, both as a faculty member and also as a scholar. So then kind of forward really quickly, I'm currently serving as the executive director of Portland Adult Education, which has a large immigrant population. I myself, I know I have an American accent when I speak English, but I moved to North America actually when I was 17 alone for schooling. I started college at 19 in New York. Then I went on for college and graduate school in the US. So I'm US educated from the last half of my high school, but I was alone. So it was really hard. I didn't come from an English language educational background. I was educated entirely in Japanese. So that transition felt very difficult. I wasn't really familiar with the American or English language educational system where essay writing was paramount and people were really trained in it from an earlier age of making arguments, having an opinion on things and supporting that with evidence. The Japanese education that I had gone through was more about memorizing facts, large volumes of that, and also more logic through mathematical thinking. So I was strong in those areas, but I was really not strong in terms of argumentation, especially in a language that I was not educated in. I went through that struggle a lot also because I was here alone. I do have relatives here, but none of them are local. So I needed to, figure out everything else that a lot of college students had their parents just pick up for them and do, buying tickets to go back home, arranging to get my stuff into storage, and, just sort of these little things, working with the social system here that when you have family around, your family, your parents usually just take care for you. And I guess I was lucky in that if I were in Japan, my parents would have taken care of it for me. But in the States, I was pretty much alone, so I didn't have that. A lot of our student population are coming with a similar background. Either they've come here very young on their own or with very little social supports. And so there's a lot that I identify with. I understand because I went through a lot of similar experiences, just the difficulty of moving to a completely new social system. That is what I draw on when I write grants for this institution. And the previous institution that I headed, Maine Association for New Americans, also we were working with new immigrants, newly arrived immigrants. That was a big part of how I was writing grants, was drawing from my experience and also hearing from the board members and others who themselves often came through the same pathway or who were working in this field for a long time and had good observations to make. Weaving together the stories of the people through extending some of my experiences, empathy, and listening is how I shape the grant writing narratives. So I really love grant writing. I find that grant writing for me is sort of a happy medium between writing a story and making a narrative fit into a certain set of criteria. So it feels a little bit like coloring the box, where I didn't define what the box looks like. But it's also a forum for negotiation, in that it's an opportunity to have grantors who are willing to extend support to a population that is doing something that they don't have enough resources to sustain themselves. It's a way to extend resources for a population or a community of people. But in thinking about that, we don't want to recreate the charity mindset of we always have to have the downtrodden who we're supporting to feel good about ourselves. The grant writing process allows, I think, us to help sort of reframe that narrative of this is charity work, that we'll always need people who are helping. There are people with agency who have good ideas, who are willing to work hard, given some opportunities, and become one of the leaders who are going to be sitting at the seat with you, either grant making or making decisions about the organizations. That process of negotiating with the grantors and thinking about how we can reframe things so that we can affect social change and create larger impact, I find starts at the grant writing process, or approaching them about do they have a grant or funding that they might be able to extend to support a community or a population if you're thinking about donations.
So far, what I'm hearing is there is the passion for who you're serving. You obviously have a very good, strong connection with whom you're serving because of your own experience, which that could be a whole conversation in itself, right? I love how you put, kind of build that vision that it's not the idea of charity, but it's really the idea of look at these amazing people that have agency, good ideas. Don't you want to come alongside? So it really is a huge reframing from what I've heard of grant writing a lot of times before. Mm-hmm. So I just want to underline that a little bit because I didn't want that to get lost in the richness of what I'm hearing you talk about. So for you, it's almost natural, it sounds like, to not be begging, to not be almost not even needing. It's almost like you're saying those giving actually might have a greater need than those receiving the grants, just because of what a great idea it is.
Yeah. I think there's been a drive in the nonprofit world of talking about grants and donations of investments in community. But, that's what it means to me. It's an investment in some good ideas. This is not charity, right? That's the only way you can think of it as an investment, is that you are investing in a valuable thing already that might need a little extra support and push in a certain specific way. And you can be a partner in that if you so choose. But I think also a little bit of where this framing comes from me is that I'm coming from an abundance mindset. I'm not really thinking of it as a little sliver in a pie. Can I get it or can I not get it? And I'm in competition with tons of other people. I do truly believe that the more you share with others strategies and actions and anything, the richer we all become for that, because the resources get distributed more fairly, and we all can do more with less when we work together, right?
That's such an important piece to say, because the more we work together, the more that we allow nonprofits in any fashion to thrive,
Mhm.
the stronger the community is going to be. And I love what you said, that you can do more with less because of that partnership rather than competition.
I think in the end, the people who collaborate more accomplish more because that collaborative spirit is also just what drives more lasting impact. Because the inclusivity, the more people you involve, the more the more of an impact you're going to have in more numbers of people, right? So ultimately, that is what's going to have the lasting impact. That's really important. In some areas, I find in Maine, a lot of organizations are requiring collaboration within the community, among organizations. I know that's sort of the mindset it's coming from. At the same time, I think it's really tricky when the grantors require that, because then sometimes it just opens up and allows the organizations that have been wanting to work together. And it also sometimes creates, I think, unfortunate competitions of like, we're going to share bits and pieces of information so we can say that we're collaborating, but we don't really want to collaborate. I think there's a bit of a push and pull, but I do think in general, just like trust-based giving has gained more traction in a similar way, requiring some level of collaboration with similar types of organizations, either by population or strategy or focus, is generally a good thing. Everything kind of has its pros and cons, but I think just having a direction like that is more positive than not. In terms of grant writing, I've done a fair amount of reframing, sometimes by using different words. There are certain words that I use. I'm like, some of the examples right now are escaping me, but one of the things, like for instance, I'm very careful about is that, I don't talk about, the poor, or I talk about people who don't have resources right now, right? Like, we don't know how long term it is, we don't know how temporary it is, and like that shouldn't define them. In the social services world, there's also a drive towards talking people who are unsheltered, right, instead of the homeless. And like that
Yes.
kind of thing is something I definitely take care to think about, because you want to center the person and their agency and not the environment or the situation they're in right now. That is definitely a stigmatized situation. So that's important to me. I think things like that have to be respected in the grant writing process. Although sometimes if they're like strict word counts, I can understand how that kind of thing sometimes becomes an important consideration, but still there are ways to work around that. Just bigger reframings of concepts of talking about this as a support for an already ongoing project that has been envisioned by and comes from the community itself, even if it's just the leadership of the community or a small number of people who are looking out for and looking at the community not as an other, but looking at the community as their own. And people who have ownership over the community and how the community goes is, I think, a really important part. That was one of the key things when I was at Mana in terms of grant writing. We implemented a peer support program for immigrants, and peer support by definition is by people who have a similar or the same lived experience, right? And so of course that grant had to talk about that, but it's not just that program. I think everything kind of at a certain level has to be peer support based and peer driven. And so that is one of the things that I consider to be very important in grant writing, is keeping that agency in there, even when they're state grants that require you to talk about the marginalized population that you're going to save. So I tried to shift that a little bit to the extent that it doesn't disqualify the grant and it still says that we're going to save them, but shifting the narrative a little bit so it doesn't sound like that's what we're saying, to just kind of help the awareness to grow in the grant readers, depending on what kind of grant it is, right? If it's a family foundation based thing or something like that, more like, I think, politically aligned, or I shouldn't say politically, ideologically aligned, about like this is more about an investment. I will definitely use that
Yes.
word and to definitely emphasize that piece of, this is an investment in a group of people who already have great ideas and they just need a little bit of support in certain ways. That also, I think, opens up the conversation to what else can we provide to support other than just money, because I've had
Yeah.
several different grants that don't just supply money, but supply other forms of like a consultant, access to websites of nonprofit professionals of different kinds, a coach, and all kinds of things, like things that are not necessarily just pure money that small nonprofits and any kind of nonprofit really need, but don't necessarily have the resources or the time to devote to, and they give you access to that. It's grants like that and conversations that lead to investments from donors and grantors that really hold that spirit of it's a significant investment that we're asking for, but we're working in collaboration. And it creates the space for dialogue instead of just being told what we will supply. It kind of helps to humanize each other, because then you find out that certain organizations have certain restrictions and that's why that's all they can supply for you. But then if they know you have other needs, they have their own connections, right? And they can say, we can't supply that, but so and so might. So then why don't you go talk to them? It just kind of spreads the awareness and helps to support really what it is that needs support. That sort of candid discussion of what is needed, what kind of support is required to go further with the good ideas that really change people's lives is pretty important. I like to do that through grant writing.
I love that. Let's go back to that beginning of grant writing. What I'm hearing is you know your audience, right? You know who it is, and you can mold stories, visuals, get the language that's appropriate language, more honoring language that you mentioned. I heard you say knowing what you need, which obviously there's usually a financial
Yes.
component. Like one thing that our company did is we had very high professional leaders coach us. And so I had a professional coach, and it leveled up my game. I'm a much better leader because of someone donating their time, a 2-year investment to make me better at what I do. If you had to go, I don't know what to do, what other steps did I miss into hitting send on a grant?
I think it's really important to like read the grant application very closely. Also understand who is putting out the request for proposal or the grant application. So understanding a context that it's coming from. Grant applications in a lot of ways are like job applications, right? You really have to know who they are and what their mission is in general, and not just what the grant application says, but generally what is the mission of this organization and why are they offering, you know, this money or program or whatever it is that they're offering. Contacting, if possible, the person who is running the grant making. Even the state, which I think the state and the feds, who are the strictest in terms of like not allowing contact with the applicants, always have like the open Q&A, right? That's where you're supposed to ask your questions and then you get a written response. That's also like helpful in just gaining clarity in terms of who is your audience and what is their actual aim. Understanding that is really critical. You have to know what they are looking for actually to be able to shape the grant. And I think that's the other thing, is that sometimes people treat grants like, oh, I can make this argument to say such and such. I'm like, no. So they're offering a certain thing so that it aligns with their values and their mission or whatever it is that they're trying to fulfill. So if it doesn't align, you can't get that money and you can't get that support, and just applying is a waste of time. And that's where you just have to say, you know what, that was a great idea and I would have loved to get that $1 million, but it's just not in the books. It's not going to work. I think that's where you have to cut your losses and move on and look for the next grant that's going to be better aligned. Also remembering that, especially with family foundations, the open publicly published grants are really like a first step in trying to get to know you. And they want to often create relationships with the grantees. So it's just an entryway. It's just putting your foot in the door. It's like an entry-level job. Then if you prove yourself, they're going to keep funding you and they're probably going to start funding you even more. So there's kind of, a relationship building side to it too. Even with states, I find that to be true, is that you kind of get one grant, you show that you can do good results, and then they will give you more, right? Because they trust you that you can do good work. Just doing a lot of good research to make sure it's in alignment with your organizational or program mission. And then, creating the narrative, and the budget narrative is also really important, and be able to, so you have the narrative, which is inspiring, right? About like, what kind of organization are you? What kind of things you've done? And, that, because it's all in words, I find that it's more malleable. You can really say whatever you want. And the budget narrative is where you really ground it and show that you have a clear, solid plan. And this is how, this inspiring stuff you're just talking about, the good story that you were telling, this is how you're going to ground it, and this is how you're going to actualize it. That's where experience of how much you've done this, how realistic you are, and how good of a plan you have is what shows through. Some places don't ask for extensive budget narrative, but you still have to put in a budget of some sort. That's where it kind of shows off. Working on the budget pretty carefully is also important. So I would say good research on the funding organization, on the RFP itself, and then trying to get in touch with the people who's running the grant making if possible to see if you can get more information. And then creating a good application, and then hit send and see what happens.
Another thing that comes to mind is analytics. Writing a good budget narrative. I actually even like that terminology because it's not just throwing a number there, but it really is thinking through what this could accomplish. Like, this dollar goes towards this future. I love that. There's always that balance between story and analytics. How do you think through analytics? How do you think through what to track? How to say this narrative is getting us here. During the application process, are you thinking through what you might track? Because I know a lot of the stuff we've done is, this is what we asked for, and this is how many people, but any thoughts on that in the application piece of it?
So grants that I wrote for my own research didn't have numbers of people, and they usually were about like, how my studies or my research activity was going to contribute to this outcome, right? Which was usually research outcomes. The target was pretty soft, I would say. When I started writing grants for organizations, then that was where numbers of people started to matter, and what concretely did they accomplish, and what counted as milestones really started to matter. But I felt like there were always clearly defined, because so much of the grant writing I've done has involved counting people, and counting people who either received certain services. Like earlier on, I was doing a lot of COVID stuff. So it was like, how many people were we going to test for COVID? How many people were we going to distribute testing kits to? How many people are we going to get to vaccination? Like, it was very concrete stuff. And now it's like, how many people are going to take these classes and complete them, so that we can say that they've accomplished a certain level of learning that will help them in either advancing their careers or just be able to engage more in civic life. I guess it's always felt very concrete to me, because the only things that we usually had to track for those things was numbers of people, usually some kind of demographic information. How much demographics do we have to gather, and what kind of demographics they want? Like, they always wanted to know race, but some of them also want to know, age group, where are they coming from? Are they American-born US citizens, or are they not? What kind of education level are they coming from, right? Like, there are all kinds of demographic information that it's sometimes hard to know. But I've always written grants for programs that were not established yet, but we had a clear idea of what kind of program we wanted to run. So like, the design of the program was set, and I was just looking for grants that would fund that program so that we can actually run them. What we were going to report on was kind of predetermined already at the point of the application. Then I thought about mostly personnel costs are the most expensive part, and things that are not personnel, we had like a ballpark figure of how much that part would cost. I go through thinking about that already at the budget narrative, and I'm usually converting the ballpark figure of so many hours of so-and-so's time is about how many dollars, and running a class costs how many dollars, and I have those things already, and then so I'm able to use a back of the envelope kind of calculation at the grant application process. I don't get too detailed because I don't want to spend too much time on something we may or may not get. But it is, it is important to have um, set prices for things. And that was definitely one of the things I did at Portland Adult Ed. They hadn't gone through the pricing of things for a really long time. So we're basically offering a lot of things for like almost free, and it was not covering the expenses. So I went through recalculating how much it actually costs to offer certain classes. And that also allowed me to just be able to say to potential donors, this is how much it costs to run a class. It would be great if you want to support this, but this is the cost of things. And I think having that straight out in your head is very important for a grant writer and also for a director or president or CEO, whatever it is. They should always have that, I think, at the tip of their tongue of how much it costs to just run the basic operation of the organization.
That's the thing with the CEO, executive director, is they need to know that. They need to be a spokesperson. They need to at least understand how things run, maybe not get in the day to day, but there's so many different diversity. So being comfortable with that knowledge, because one of those liabilities is we don't have a good grasp on what it's really costing, like, the turnkey cost of running something, because you do have to think through the electricity and not just the manpower but so many other pieces. You mentioned building trust by showing yourself reliable. What are some of those elements that show yourself reliable, or that people would want to like you said, maybe give more in the future? What are some of those elements?
I think definitely showing good results, being able to deliver what you said you're going to do is ideal. Also, part of the issue is that you don't want to be constantly over delivering by a lot, because what that shows is that you're not good at estimating what you actually need for what you said you're doing, right? So over delivering by like 10% is, I think, good. But if you're constantly over delivering by like 25% or more, that's also not good. Being kind of close to what you said you're able to accomplish. Also, when you can't, because that also happens a lot, being able to explain why in a way that makes sense. Just showing that you're open and you're honest. Grantors really, and especially when it's trust-based giving, like I think what's challenging for them is that they're trusting that you're going to trust them as well. And I think about this a lot in terms of, communication. People talk about, oh, effective communication. I talk about effective communication too. But what's important about communication and trust as well is it's a two-way road. So like you can't just tell someone, trust me. And you can't tell someone, you're a bad communicator. You can't just like say that and cut them off. Like if you think the way someone's communicating is not working for you, you're under obligation to try to make that better, right? And if the other person then doesn't respond in kind and say, okay, I see that we're not communicating well, let's try to work on this, right? If there isn't that response, then yeah, okay, you've made your effort, you've reached out, it's not working, fine. More often than not, I see people saying, I've tried, they don't trust me, or they're a bad communicator, and then cutting them off, especially when they see someone, if they see what they're doing is punching up, right? But like, it doesn't matter if you're punching up or punching down or punching sideways, like it has to be a two-way road. And so if you're not trusting, you can't just say, I can't trust them and, move on. And in the same way, I think with grantors, you have to show that you are trusting them to be ethical and really partners in this work. And you do that by being open and being like honest about what's working and what's not working, while understanding that they're sometimes in weird situations like a mandated reporter. So there are certain things that you probably should be careful about not disclosing everything that are going to land them into trouble, but also like just, being able to tell them what's going on, because all grantors should know that not everything goes according to plan and not everything is ideal. Honestly, I think that if a grantor doesn't have that kind of forgiveness, that they're very tricky to work with, and you need to know that it's like a one-time thing or it's not going to be a long-term thing. That's also like a good sign, right? I mean, you have to choose who you're going to rely on as a long-term funder.
Yeah, that partnership is really important. Me being an operations leader overseas and working with very generous major donors, but also some high maintenance. We always had our books in order, but we also was 30 countries. We went down to 10 once we branched off so we could manage things better. But there are times when people might have money, but they might actually take too much time and energy to make it a partnership. Besides like trusting your gut, are there tips around that? You mentioned it, and I want to emphasize that is have a conversation. What is it that you need? What is and work on that communication piece, which is a two-way street. What other tips do you have of maybe turning around something that might be a high maintenance potential donor to something that could be a good working relationship?
That's tricky. I don't feel like I've had a lot of experience in that area. But having said that, I'm about to say something that I'm not sure that I agree with. But at some level, I think too much communication is better than too little communication. I'm just thinking of like sort of very concrete things. Having a monthly sort of report out, right, to a group of donors, I think is a good thing. And for people who want more of an individual approach, even like copy and pasting parts of those monthly report outs, because they're probably not reading the entire thing, and that's why they want individual report outs, right? And just putting that into like an individualized email. If you have like a bunch of high maintenance donors, I think what might work, this is getting to theoretical grounds, and I don't know how good it is as a strategy, but maybe having certain templates that you create for like a monthly report out and like individualizing it a little bit per person might work actually better, so that instead of like a mass newsletter, that you just have like maybe 10 people who you have like monthly report outs for, and then individualize a little bit in the beginning or the end, knowing what they're actually concerned about. Might make some sense. Quarterly newsletter is probably like the minimum that people should be doing. If you don't have something like that going out regularly, I think they could also accept that a lot of the content is going to be the same across the board for some people. And it will make them not so mad that like the content is almost identical across different people if they do decide to share, and like understand that it is individualized a little bit, but like the bulk of the content is going to be similar, if not the same. That might be like ways to work with it. I'm a big fan of email templates.
What you've mentioned, whether it's anything you can do to make that communication easier and more effective. Yeah. And what I'm also hearing is consistent. You don't have to talk to them every day and everybody's busy, but a minimum of quarterly. That consistency is probably one of the sweet spots I'm hearing.
Yeah, I definitely think so. It gives people a sense of security when they know that they're going to hear from you at a certain interval, even if they don't read the whole thing, right? If they happen to be too busy at the time, they can still go back like a month later and say, oh, you know what, by the way, I heard. And if that's the time that you connected, you could just say, you know how I said in that quarterly newsletter, or that monthly report out that I sent you last month, and they can be like, oh yeah, that's right, and they can go back. That's reassuring to know that you were already told, even if you didn't have time to look at it. Those kinds of like small buildups are what I think build trust.
Great. Abbie, I want to be mindful of our time. Anything you want to share before we sign off?
Thank you for inviting me. I love grant writing. I also like the opportunity to work with people who I feel so close to. That's always very nice to have the opportunity to have a time to like sort of step back and talk about that. So I appreciate your invitation.
Well, thank you. This could have gone in so many different directions because as an exchange student in high school in Germany, I get the feeling lonely and not having family around. I mean, you did it at a much more extreme level, but the compassion to have with people who are not in their homeland, it's not their native language. We don't realize how much culture we have in everything we do, but even in the education system, where every education system is very different.
Yes.
Some are based on just memorization, some are based on creative thought, just so many different ways. So if people have people not from their culture, whether it's neighbors or whatnot, definitely care for them well. Thank you, Abbie, for your time, and I look forward to more conversations with you.
Thank you, Marla.